I was just painting my neighbor's porch when his sister stepped outside, handed me a drink, and said softly, "Take a break inside." I didn't know then that stepping through that door would change everything. The afternoon sun was relentless, turning the wooden porch boards warm under my knees as I worked. Each stroke of the brush left a fresh trail of dark stain, the smell of it mixing with the faint sweetness of cut grass from earlier that morning. Sweat slid down the inside of my forearm, catching on the edge of my wrist before dropping onto the steps. I liked the rhythm of it. Dip, drag, smooth. But I'd been out there for hours, and the heat was starting to throb behind my eyes. That's when the screen door creaked softly behind me. I glanced up, half expecting my neighbor, but it wasn't him. It was his sister, Claire. She was framed by the doorway, holding a glass of lemonade, condensation running down the sides. Her hair was tied back loosely, a few strands sticking to her temples in the heat. There was an ease about the way she leaned on the doorframe, one hand braced lightly against the wood, watching me for a moment before she spoke. "You should take a break inside before you overheat." Her voice wasn't commanding, just calm, like she was stating something obvious and waiting for me to agree. I froze, brush in midair, suddenly aware of the sweat on my shirt and the smudge of stain on my arm. My first instinct was to wave her off politely. "I'm fine, really," but something in her tone made me pause. I set the brush down carefully on the edge of the can, wiped my hands on the rag hanging from my back pocket, and stood. She smiled, just barely, like she was pleased I'd listened. The steps creaked under my boots as I crossed to her, and as I reached the top, she stepped aside to let me pass. The air was cooler near the doorway, and it smelled faintly of whatever she'd been cooking earlier. Garlic, maybe, and something with herbs. As I passed her, she reached out lightly, almost absently, and touched my shoulder. Not a pat, not a grab, just a soft, grounding touch. The pads of her fingers were cool against my overheated skin, and for a split second, the contact was enough to make me catch my breath. "Go on," she said, nodding toward the kitchen. I stepped inside, feeling a strange mix of relief and nervousness. Relief from the heat. Nervousness because, suddenly, it felt like I'd left the safe, familiar space of the porch and stepped into something more personal, her world. Behind me, I heard the door ease shut with a soft click. The shift from the sun-bleached porch to the dim, cool kitchen felt almost startling. My eyes took a moment to adjust. The air was several degrees cooler, carrying a faint hum of a ceiling fan from another room and the quiet ticking of a wall clock. Claire moved ahead of me, her bare feet silent against the floorboards. She didn't rush. She seemed to move at her own pace, as though she knew this house so well it had grown around her. "Sit," she said gently, gesturing toward the kitchen table. It was a small space, but carefully kept, a vase of fresh flowers on the table, a stack of neatly folded dish towels on the counter. Everything felt touched by her, in a way I couldn't explain. I sat, suddenly aware of my own presence. My paint-streaked jeans, the smell of stains still clinging to my skin. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she didn't mind. She filled a glass from a pitcher on the counter, then set it in front of me. The ice clinked softly as she placed it down. "Drink," she said, and there was no trace of formality in her tone, just quiet insistence. I obeyed, feeling the cold glass against my palm. The first sip made me realize just how thirsty I was. She didn't sit right away. For a moment, she just watched me, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, more in a way that made me feel seen. Then she pulled out the chair across from me, sitting with one leg tucked under her, elbow resting on the table. "You've been out there since this morning," she said, her voice calm, conversational. "Yeah," I admitted, setting the glass down. "Wanted to get as much done before the weekend as I could." She nodded, looking thoughtful. Her hair had loosened a little more, one strand falling forward against her cheek. She brushed it back absent-mindedly. The kitchen was quiet, except for the faint hum of the fan and the clink of ice settling in the pitcher. It felt oddly intimate, this stillness. I glanced down at my hands on the table, rough from work, stained from paint, and then up at her. She was watching me with a small, curious smile, not prying, just waiting for me to speak if I wanted to. For a second, our eyes caught and held, and it felt like an entire conversation passed between us, about the heat outside, about the quiet of the house, about how strange and nice it was to be here together. I took another sip of water, just to do something with my hands. When I set the glass down, hers almost brushed mine, not quite touching, but close enough that I felt the nearness like static. The first few sips of water cooled me enough to realize just how long I'd been pushing through the heat. My shoulders loosened, my breath slowed. And somehow, that made it easier to talk. Claire rested her chin lightly on one hand, her other tracing the rim of her mug. "So," she said softly, "you really like doing this kind of work?" I hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Yeah, it's honest. You can see what you've done at the end of the day. I like that." She tilted her head, considering this, then smiled. Not a broad smile, but one of those small, knowing ones that make you feel like you've said something that matters. "You know," she said after a beat, "my dad used to make us help him with the porch every summer. I hated it when I was a teenager." She chuckled, shaking her head a little. "But now, I can still remember the smell of the stain, the sound of the brush dragging. It's funny the things you end up missing." Her voice had gone a little softer, like she'd drifted back to that memory. I found myself smiling, picturing her younger, sitting cross-legged on a porch somewhere with stain on her hands. "That's exactly it," I said, leaning forward slightly. "There's something grounding about it. Like the work keeps you steady." Our eyes met again, and this time she didn't look away. Her smile widened, just slightly, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun outside. The conversation kept going, easy and unforced. She asked about where I grew up, and I told her about the old garage where I first learned to build things with my grandfather. She listened intently, her expression never drifting, as if every word mattered. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "It's nice, hearing someone talk about something they actually love." I blinked at that. "Doesn't everyone?" She gave a small laugh, shaking her head. "Not really. Most people just complain about work, or talk about how soon they can be done with it. You talk about it like it gives something back to you." I felt my ears grow warm at that. No one had ever put it that way before. There was a pause, but it didn't feel uncomfortable, just quiet. Her fingers brushed a crumb off the table, slow and absent-minded, before resting near mine. Something about the moment felt suspended, like if either of us spoke too quickly, it would break. The hum of the ceiling fan, the ice melting in the pitcher, the faint smell of wood stains still clinging to me. All of it pressed in around us, holding the space steady. I realized, suddenly, how much I didn't want to leave just yet. At some point, the conversation just stopped. Not abruptly, not awkwardly. It just tapered off, like both of us had said exactly enough for the moment. The kitchen had grown warmer as the afternoon wore on, but a soft breeze moved through the curtains now, carrying in the sound of cicadas. The sun had shifted, and a narrow beam of golden light cut across the table, landing across Claire's forearm. It lit the faint freckles there, the delicate curve of her wrist as she turned her coffee mug absently between her palms. I sat back a little, letting the chair creak quietly beneath me. My heart was still beating faster than normal, though nothing had happened to make it race. Claire broke the silence first. Her voice was softer now, almost thoughtful. "Do you ever feel lonely, working by yourself all the time?" The question landed gently, but with surprising weight. I blinked, my fingers curling slightly against the edge of the table. "Yeah," I admitted, before I could talk myself out of it. "I guess I do. Not always. But sometimes, when the day's really quiet, yeah." She nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on me now, no trace of judgment in them, just a kind of quiet understanding. "I get that," she said after a moment. "This house is big when no one's around. Sometimes it feels too quiet, too still." There was something about the way she said it, not sad exactly, but open, that made my chest tighten. She didn't look away, and neither did I. The stillness between us changed, somehow, deepened. Then she did something so small, but it felt enormous. She reached across the table, her hand resting lightly over mine. Her palm was warm, fingers soft but sure as they curled around my hand. She didn't squeeze, just rested there, her thumb brushing once, slow and almost absent-minded, against the back of my knuckles. I felt the warmth of her touch travel all the way up my arm, settling somewhere deep in my chest. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. I didn't move. I didn't want to. Her eyes softened as she studied me, and something unspoken passed between us. Not a confession, not even a promise, just a shared acknowledgement that this moment mattered. When she finally drew her hand back, it was slow, her fingertips brushing against my skin until they were gone. The space her touch had left felt charged, like the air right before a summer storm. Neither of us said anything right away. We just sat there, in the quiet, the hum of the fan filling the room while my pulse settled into a slow, steady rhythm again. For the first time all day, I wasn't thinking about the porch. The touch of her hand still lingered like an echo, even after she'd pulled it away. I found myself tracing the faint warmth left on my skin with my thumb, as if memorizing it. Part of me wanted to speak, to say something to fill the space, but my throat felt tight. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it carried weight now, and I didn't trust myself not to break it clumsily. I glanced at the clock on the wall, more out of instinct than real need. Late afternoon. I could tell myself I should get back to work, that there was still sunlight left for painting. That would be the polite thing, the easy thing. But I didn't stand. Instead, I sat there, my hands resting flat on the table, listening to the faint ticking of the clock, the low hum of the refrigerator, the steady rhythm of her breathing. Claire seemed to sense the hesitation. She wasn't looking at me, not directly. She was staring out the window, one hand curled loosely around her mug, thumb tapping against the ceramic. But her body was angled toward me, her shoulder closer than before, like she was waiting to see what I'd do. I swallowed, leaning back slightly in my chair. The urge to leave battled with something quieter but stronger, the need to stay, to stretch this moment a little longer. Finally, I spoke, my voice low. I should probably. I gestured vaguely toward the porch. She turned her head then, her eyes meeting mine with a small, calm smile that stopped me mid-sentence. You could, she said gently. Then, after a beat, or you could take just a few more minutes. You've earned it. Her tone wasn't teasing, wasn't coaxing. It was simply kind. The air felt stiller somehow, the light shifting just enough to paint her hair in a soft halo where it escaped her tie. I found myself sitting forward again, my arms braced on the table. You don't mind? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Her lips curved, a smile so small it was almost private. No, she said simply. I don't mind. Something in my chest eased at that, and I stayed where I was. The quiet returned, but now it felt deliberate, as if we'd both chosen to sit in it, together. I could feel the beat of my own pulse, slow and steady, as though it had matched the rhythm of the house itself. I realized then that I wasn't just resting. I was waiting. For what? I wasn't sure yet. But I knew I wanted to see where this moment would go. It was Claire who moved first. She set her mug down with a soft clink, then stood, stretching slightly, her shoulders rolling back with a quiet sigh. Come on, she said gently, her voice breaking the quiet without shattering it. It's cooler on the back steps. You can sit there for a while before heading back out. There was no reason to refuse, not that I wanted to. I stood and followed her through the narrow hallway toward the back of the house. The kitchen gave way to a screen door, which she pushed open with her hip. A wash of cooler air rolled over me as we stepped outside. The backyard was quiet, shaded by a pair of tall trees. The light here was softer, turning everything gold. The steps were wide and wooden, worn smooth by years of use. She sat first, leaving enough space for me, but still close enough that our knees would almost brush if I sat straight. I lowered myself down beside her, feeling the boards cool against the backs of my legs. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air was alive with the sound of cicadas and the distant trill of birds settling in for the evening. Somewhere, far off, a dog barked once. Claire tipped her head back slightly, watching the canopy overhead. I love this time of day, she murmured. Everything feels slower. I followed her gaze, staring up at the leaves shifting gently in the breeze. Yeah, I said quietly. It does. A long pause stretched between us, but it didn't feel empty. Her arm rested against the step between us, her hand relaxed, fingers curled loosely. Then the wind shifted, brushing a loose strand of her hair across her cheek. Before I could think about it, I reached out and tucked it gently back behind her ear. She turned her head toward me then, her eyes meeting mine. There was no surprise in her face, no flinch, no hesitation, just a soft, steady look that made my chest feel tight. Thanks, she said, barely above a whisper. I nodded, suddenly aware of how close we were sitting. Close enough to see the faint lines near her eyes when she smiled. Close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her even in the cooler air. We didn't talk much after that. The quiet was enough. Occasionally, our arms brushed when one of us shifted, and each time, It felt deliberate, like we were both aware of the contact and neither of us minded. The sun dipped lower, painting the yard in long shadows. I found myself wishing time would slow even more. For the first time all day, I wasn't thinking about the work waiting outside. I was only thinking about the moment I was in and how much I didn't want to leave it. Eventually, the light began to fade into that soft blue that comes just before nightfall. The crickets had taken over from the cicadas, their songs steady and rhythmic, and somewhere a porch light clicked on, spilling a faint glow over the steps. Claire was the one to stand first, brushing her palms on the sides of her linen pants. "I should probably start dinner before it gets too late," she said, her tone soft, not dismissive, just practical. I nodded, though a part of me felt reluctant to move. I stood slowly, stretching the stiffness from my legs. She stepped up onto the porch and turned back toward me. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she extended her hand. It was such a simple gesture, but something about it made the air feel charged again. I placed my paint-roughened hand in hers, and she held it, not just a quick shake but a lingering touch, her thumb brushing lightly over my knuckles. "Thanks for keeping me company," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost private, as though this was a small confession meant just for me. I found myself smiling, unable to help it. "Thanks for inviting me in," I said. The words felt bigger than they sounded, like we both knew I wasn't just talking about coming inside to escape the heat. Her lips curved in that small, knowing smile again. She let go of my hand, slowly, her fingertips the last to leave. I turned toward the side yard, the path that would take me back to the porch I'd been painting just hours earlier. But halfway across the yard, I glanced back. She was still there, standing on the step, one hand resting lightly against the doorframe. The porch light caught her hair, outlining her in gold. When our eyes met across the space, she didn't look away, just held my gaze with a softness that felt like a promise. I raised my hand slightly in a quiet goodnight. She mirrored the gesture, then slipped back inside, the screen door closing with a soft click. I stood there for another moment, just listening to the night sounds, feeling the air cool against my skin. My chest felt different, fuller somehow, like I'd carried something heavy all day without realizing it, and finally set it down. When I walked back to my own porch, the boards still smelled of fresh stain. But I didn't feel the same as I had this morning. Something had shifted. And though nothing dramatic had happened, no declarations, no big moment, I knew this wasn't the last time I'd sit across from Claire at that kitchen table, or the last time I'd feel her hand rest gently over mine. For the first time in a long while, the evening didn't feel quiet in a lonely way. It felt like the beginning of something.